Good evening. We'll let y'all make your way in the room. Hello, hello. Wonderful. I think we're ready to go. Popping up. Perfect. Okay. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Kelly Dyer. I'm from Audrey's Books. And on behalf of Audrey's, I want to welcome you all tonight to tonight's triple header. We're very excited to be here with all of you tonight. Before we start, I do want to acknowledge that we are on Treaty 6 territory, traditional meeting grounds, gathering place, and traveling route to the Cree, the Saulteaux, the Blackfoot, the Métis, the Dene, and the Nakota Sioux. We acknowledge the many First Nations, Métis and Inuit whose footsteps have marked these lands for centuries. And as we are virtual, we also want to acknowledge that there are possibly people joining us from other territories as well. So thank you very much. And before I turn things over to NeWest, I just want to mention that, of course, we have all of tonight's authors' books available, all those wonderful reads. I will be putting a link in the chat to the list, along with our contact information. For those of you who are far away, we are in Edmonton. We're offering curbside pickup and delivery for those books. And of course, if you're joining us from further away, we can always mail you books. If you want books, we will find a way to get you books, no question. I would now like to hand the mic over, so to speak, to NeWest. So please welcome their marketing and production coordinator and a writer and poet herself, Claire Kelly.
Thank you, Kelly. Welcome again, and thanks to everyone for coming, and to the readers, and to Kelly. I'm, as Kelly said, Claire Kelly at NeWest Press. We're here on Zoom tonight for a triple header reading and Q&A with three of our recent authors, John O'Neill, Jacqueline Dawn, and CJ Levine. We will be recording the reading, but feel free to leave your camera on so that the readers don't feel as much like they're reading to themselves. But please leave your microphones off. After all three authors read, we'll be having a Q&A. There's a question box. That's where you put your questions. I'll read them aloud. It's always fun to get questions from the audience. I've prepared some in case you're particularly shy this evening, but it usually works better if you're not shy, to be perfectly honest. So I just want to thank Kelly again for agreeing to be here, and also for reading a land acknowledgement and acknowledging that we're coming from multiple locations across the country. Thank you. Up first tonight is John O'Neill. John's poetry and fiction are award-winning poetry, and he is the author of 4 poetry collections and a novel. He grew up in Scarborough, Ontario, which we always called Scarberia, out in Ajax, out Durham region. He was a high school English and dramatic arts teacher for 29 years, and he now lives in Toronto. Though before all this physical distancing, he made frequent trips to the Canadian Rockies, which is obvious with his collection, Goth Girls of Banff. And I just want to announce that Goth Girls of Banff has just been shortlisted for the Relit Award. So congrats, John, and welcome.
Thank you. I'm going to read from the collection. I decided I'm going to read the first story. A couple of other times I've read the actual Goth Girls of Banff story, but I want to read the opening piece in the collection. By the way, we used to call Scarberia, we'd call it Scarberia, we'd also call it Scarlum at some point. So yeah, it's got that sort of reputation for some reason, but in any case, this is the first story in the collection, and just a little bit of a very short synopsis. It deals with an ex-con who's hitchhiking. He was a convict in Collins Bay, and he's been paroled, and he hitchhikes out west for various reasons. And just outside of Calgary, he gets picked up actually by a family, a husband and wife and 2 little girls who don't know, they don't know anything about him. They don't know he's an ex-convict. And the story goes from there. Anyway, the story is called What Is Written, or Talking to Keep the Bears Away. The Allens picked me up outside Calgary in an old Volkswagen van. Gail's arm, with the Roadrunner tattoo on it, on the bluish culvert of her wrist, how'd she manage that, motioned me towards them with, long as you don't mind kids, long as they don't mind me. The door screeched, slid open. I looked and flinched and stepped up, squeaked along hot vinyl and against two little girls, spokey-legged, knobby-kneed, arms crossed but quick as hummingbirds, arms crossed against me, both with their faces kept straight ahead and both smiling horribly, funnily. Maybe I smelled. Do I smell? I said, sniffing my sweaty pits, exaggerating, and the two girls giggled, the older one less, but still. Their father, bearded, straggly, barn door big, hard-necked but soft-eyed, reached a big arm back, shook my hand over his shoulder, hand an unpaved road, said smiling, good for you girls to meet new folks, right? Haven't seen a hitchhiker in weeks. Where are you headed? Vancouver eventually. It's tough to get a ride, been 4 days from Thunder Bay. Geez, said Gail, people scared of hitchers. Too many horror stories, I guess. And then there's that kid attacked on a Greyhound near Winnipeg. Gruesome. Please don't decapitate us. Doesn't seem too much to ask. She laughed, nearly screamed, voice high and thin like razor barbed wire, caught herself again, put a fist to her mouth, winked at her girls as if to say, I know this ain't too scary for the likes of you. I caught the bandwagon, said, I heard stories of hitchhikers getting a lift and meeting their makers. Please don't kill me either. Knew why I'd had such trouble thumbing the flatland, the bread basket. I was exposed. Folks sensed something, sadness coming off me like dust, thick and arid, billowing out, telling folks they should leave me well enough alone, like they knew where I was coming from and what I'd done. Gail screamed, caught herself again, said, anyways, Bob here was in the military. He'd snap you like a wishbone. I wondered if Gail was sniffing me out. Bob said, you can make a wish. Gail said, don't sweat. He only hurts conservative types and anybody from Ottawa. Left a path of destruction across the east. The girl nearest me, the older one, stretched her pale arms in front of her, Frankenstein's monster in miniature, said, Mr. Harper has some good ideas, snapped her bubblegum in exclamation, assassinating the back of her seat. Her father laughed, you'll be hitching soon with that opinion, caught me in the rear view, said, Leslie had to follow the election at her school, was assigned Harper's campaign, poor girl. Gail added, out of the quivery blue, the mountains look like clouds, hard to believe they're even real. I looked out, swallowing, but settling in, liking the banter, tried not to look in the rear view, shifted so I couldn't, all them yesterdays. Tasted the tang of gasoline and saw through the cracked windshield the ridges of mountains between Bob and Gail. There was a fault line in the dirty glass from upper left to lower right, a slash, a lightning strike, the mountains and sky moving below, above it. I tried to remember the Stephen Harper joke that my last ride, a gnarled old woman who wore a paisley scarf and whose makeup face looked like crumbling stucco, had told me something about Captain Bloodless, nicknamed the Harpoon and the sub-prime minister. I couldn't. Just the same, I was glad to close my eyes and listen. The two little girls were bopping and posing and humming, tuned into their iPods. Gail piped up and said, girls, unplug, be sociable. She reached over and tugged their white strings, repeating, don't be awful, talk to the man. The girls didn't go cold or scowl, just got unwired as required. I scowled for them, said, sorry. It was a word I was using a lot, straining for the straight and narrow. The small one with the cat glasses and vague unibrow and ears big as her hands didn't miss a beat, said, why you hitchhiking? Don't you own a van? Her freckled jaw hung open. She was imitating a moron, imitating what she thought of me. Gail said, Lee, please. Before I could answer or laugh or spit, Lee said, what's your hitchhiker name? Not sure I got one. My name's Dawn. I don't need a van. I rely on the kindness of strangers. I thought of telling her my hitchhiker name was Donnie Dillon, what they tagged me back in the bay after the poet I liked. The little one slammed her eyes shut, made her best disgusted face, said, Dawn, that's a girl's name. Her mom turned again. They ought to make swivel seats and vehicles for people with kids, said, Lee, it's like your name. It's good for girls and boys. The older girl said, sorry, torpedoed her sister with an elbow. Lee said, you can't say sorry for me. It's my sorry. I was going to say it. I wanted to hear myself say it. It's my word, isn't it, Mum? Shut up, Leslie Mesley. Had to bite my tongue not to say, it's your sorry. Don't let anybody take it. That's a dead path. Lee continued, bouncing in place. Dad, I have to go pee. I can feel the tide coming, Dad. It's an ocean. You don't want to see the ocean, do you, under these circumstances? Their father didn't look around. We were just, you should have, Gail said, swimming upstream, Bob, swimming upstream. No station till Canmore. I'll pull over if there's a place. You can squat in the bushes. Maybe a bear can wipe your big wet bum bum. The little girl laughed, looked bored, bounced big and slapped the roof, said, Dad, bears don't like bum bums, especially yours. She made paper cut eyes, put them on me. She was wondering how I was with all the pee and bum talk. Leslie said, how do you know? Bears eat anything, even skinny, stinky things like you, and they'll probably dip you in honey before they chow down. Gail said, geez, Louise, can we chill? The man's going to be begging to get out. Sorry, Dawn. Sure you didn't bargain on being a passenger on the moron bus. I smiled too stiffly. I was out of practice. While Lee rolled her eyes and head, stuck her arms out in front of her as her sister had before. Her arms were as hairy as mine, little convict arms. She started intoning, we're all morons here, we're all morons here, we're all morons here. I'll stop there.
Well, that's a stellar. Don't you guys want to know what happens in the story? We were talking before the recording started about surprises, and I realized a lot of your stories, like we talked about it in the copy, the book jacket copy too, have turns and that are surprising. This one reminds me of like when my dad hitchhiked to BC and then hitchhiked back after 6 months of eating craft dinner. And he got back home, and what did his parents serve him for his first dinner back? More craft dinner. And yeah, it's Canadian hitchhiking stories are a particular genre, I think. Thanks for reading, John.
Okay, well, thank you.
Everyone remember questions in the chat box. There's also some links up there for Audrey's books. Second link gets you to these specific books. First link gets you directly to the homepage in case you want to add more books to your order, which I recommend. Our second reader tonight is Jacqueline Dawn. Jacqueline Dawn grew up in a tabloid-free small town in Alberta. With a communications degree and a creative writing master's, she works as a freelance writer and instructor. She now lives somewhere between city and country outside Edmonton with her husband and son. The Inquirer is her debut novel.
Hello. First, I'd like to say thanks to the NeWest family. It's been amazing. I couldn't have asked for a better publisher, especially for a debut, because it is such a learning curve. And Claire and Matt have dealt with a lot of questions, and my editor Leslie, who's here tonight, was amazing. And even the new extended NeWest family, the other authors, like I see Neil Howell and AJ Devlin are here. Their books are up here behind me. It is unfortunate that we weren't able to get together in person. I actually was supposed to have an event with AJ so that his book over there could have made the signed shelf because we're a province apart, but I'm hopeful that one day we'll be able to meet in person soon, and I'm just very grateful. My book, The Inquirer, came out in October 2019. Thanks to the pandemic time warp, it feels both really long time ago and not so long ago. But it is about a girl, a young woman who's left her small town unexpectedly. There's a lot of mystery behind it, and she has to come back because her dad has suffered an accident that requires her to help on the family farm. She doesn't get the most happy reception, and she is forced to deal with the past that she left behind because in her absence, a Hollywood-style tabloid has started releasing the small town gossip, and she finds herself on the cover of said tabloid. The book has, throughout, there's the little copies of the Hollywood-style tabloid with the headlines that I had a lot of fun with. It kind of intersperses and follows in the storyline. I've had a few people point out some of the humor, but others notice that the conversations, the characters and everything end up showing up in these headlines. It was a lot of fun. But I am going to read from a fairly early on section because there's too many spoilers, and I hate when I go to an event and there's a spoiler. So I will read this part here. Okay. A piece of paper reading "Watch Your Step" was taped to the front door of Kingsley Grocery. The store was surprisingly busy. I couldn't help wondering if someone was lurking in the cereal aisle, waiting for a chance to slip a note into the locked contributions box on the counter. The inside page of every issue clearly stated that stories and tips were welcome through either the contributions box at Kingsley Grocery or the Inquirer at freemail.com. An Asian man whom I presumed was Mr. Wong worked the cash register. The Wongs had bought the store last year. Kingsley Grocery changed hands frequently. Mr. Wong nodded in my direction. I picked up a red plastic basket from the stack beside the door. Then I collected the eggs, chocolate chips, and bananas on Mom's list. "Hello," I said when it was my turn at the till. Mr. Wong put the bananas on the scale. They were overripe, but I would be paying full price. "You must be Mrs. Williams's daughter. Banana bread every other week." And he motioned toward the newspaper stand. "Thanks for reminding me," I said, choosing 2 copies of the Inquirer from the stack and putting $4 in the contributions box. "Do you publish the paper?" I asked. I couldn't help myself. I wanted to see what he would say. Did I imagine the ears of the woman beside me perking? No, I only put the coupons to help business, see? He flipped to the coupons and jabbed the paper a couple times with his finger. "Your mother says she buys the paper for the coupons." Spending $2 on a newspaper for 50 cents off a can of ketchup didn't add up, but saying so would have felt disloyal. Under Mr. Wong's watchful eye, I added a can of ketchup to my purchases. "And you can tell your father that there'll be no more falls," Mr. Wong said, pointing through the glass at the shiny new handrail I hadn't noticed on my way in. "See, some good came from the paper, no more falls." I cut across the street to give Danica her copy of the Inquirer. Then I hopped into my Jeep, put the groceries on the passenger seat, and started for the farm. My visit into Kingsley hadn't been so bad after all. I'd already driven halfway down the block before I glanced over, and the smallest headline in the bottom left-hand corner on the cover of the Inquirer caught my eye. "I was going to propose," heartbroken Mike Hayes tells all. "What?" I grabbed for the Inquirer from the passenger seat, causing my Jeep to swerve toward oncoming traffic, the only other moving vehicle on Main Street. The other driver laid on the horn of his black jacked up truck. Every second vehicle in rural Alberta was black and jacked up. I dropped the Inquirer and swerved back onto my side of the road. Driving 30 kilometers an hour gave the other driver plenty of time to express himself with obscene hand gestures as we passed. Since I'd nearly caused a car wreck in downtown Kingsley, I kept my eyes on the road the rest of the way to the farm. By the time I had parked next to Mom's empty space, I was in dire need of an antacid. I flipped quickly through the tabloid, but missed the article and had to start again. Then there it was, short and far from sweet. The article read, "Mike Hayes' heartbreak. Maya's back, but not for him." What Mike Hayes thought was forever ended before it started when Maya Williams, live-in girlfriend of 4 years, ran off in the dark of night without telling anyone. Mike came home from work one day to find half his stuff gone, a mutual friend reveals to the Inquirer. Mike was devastated. He was going to propose. The breakup initiated a string of bad luck for Mike. Shortly after Maya split, Mike was fired from his job at Trenton Auto Body. His dad suffered a stroke and his dog Rex was hit by a car. Despite hard times, rumor has it Mike can't bring himself to sell the engagement ring Maya never knew about. It was no secret in Kingsley that Maya's parents, Ray and Judith Williams, weren't Mike's biggest fans. But while Maya has been building a new life in the big city of Vancouver, Mike has been mending fences with his former in-laws by mending fences on the Williams farm. Locals are hopeful Maya's moral support will encourage her dad to a speedy recovery after his catastrophic fall at Kingsley Grocery, but some can't help but wonder how long they will be graced with their presence. Is Maya too good for her roots? Or is there more to this tale than meets the eye? The girl next door and the hometown stud, they were all an odd match from the start, says a teacher from their former high school. I never believed the perfect front myself. I immediately dialed Nathan on my cell phone, voicemail. I need to talk, I said before hanging up. I needed to calm down. What did the article say exactly? I was home because of Dad's surgery, true. I'd run away from Kingsley, true, though seeing it in print was uncomfortable. I hadn't taken half of Mike's stuff, but Mike had likely said I did. The Inquirer suggested I thought myself too good for the town, but that wasn't true, was it? It also suggested there may have been more to my leaving. Wasn't that what I wished my mom and Danica would see? I reminded myself that having these things printed in plain sight was better than having them whispered behind my back, yet my skin itched with the need to take action.
Thanks, Jacqueline. I was just wondering, do you think the Inquirer, the newspaper, would be having kind of trouble if everyone's staying home and keeping out of hijinks, or their hijinks are more hidden? I wonder if there would be more or less gossip in the town for people to write about.
I'm not sure. We're all finding tons to write about on Twitter and Facebook still these days.
Oh yeah, I guess it would be a lot more yelling about stuff, or a lot more really happy Gen Xers right now. Unexpected, the unhappy Gen Xer thing. I didn't have that on my bingo card for 2021. Thanks for reading, Jacqueline.
You're welcome.
Our final reader tonight is CJ Levine. CJ was born just a hop, skip, and a jump down the road from me in Kingston, Ontario, but she grew up all over Canada, from Comox, BC to Barrington Passage, Nova Scotia. Since 2007, she's divided her time between Ottawa and Red Deer, where she currently resides and works as a professional communications scholar who writes on television, gaming, and popular culture. At other points in her life, I always love it when authors put stuff from their previous lives in their bios. I always manage to get them in there on the website. At other points in her life, she's been a barista, tech support supervisor, marketing manager, freelance editor, and briefly a radio DJ. In Veritas is her first novel. It's a part of the Noonatak First Fiction series, which is the longest running debut author series for fiction in Canada. And In Veritas was just a finalist for the 2021 Crawford Award. So it's been doing very well for us and for CJ, presumably. Welcome, CJ.
For having me. I apologize. When I first sat down, the sun had not moved to being directly in my face, but also one of my characters is glowing, so maybe it's a little bit apropos. The things you have to know about In Veritas, it's an urban fantasy, and the main character is synesthetic. Like, she sees sounds and she tastes things that she hears, and all of her senses get kind of jumbled up together. And this is what allows her to perceive multiple realities. So at this point in the book, she has just entered an interdimensional space within the walls of an old theater with the magician Santiago and his dog Ouroboros. And they find themselves in a long, dark hallway with a glow at the end of it. The bright glow is just ahead, and Verity looks there last because she suspects the brilliance may blind her. The whiteness is not as sharp as she had thought, however. It resolves into a pale boy sprawled across a short, broken down couch in an unfortunate shade of orange and brown plaid. Its cushions are worn and misshapen. Verity thinks the boy is dying. He's young, but not a child. He has the gangliness of adolescence and a frame like paper stretched over wire. He wears a white shirt and blue jeans. There's light under his skin. It spills from him in a soft, steady glow that illuminates his face and hands. His eyes glitter blue. lit from within by hidden constellations that shine through the thinness of his half-lowered lids. He's looking at nothing in particular. His hands are long-fingered and loose. Behind him, dark wings spread from his shoulders, pressed awkwardly into the couch and splayed raggedly across faded cushions. Oro leaves Verity's side and leaps gracefully up onto the couch, nosing at the boy. The boy's holding a beer bottle in his right hand. He lifts it out of the way without protest, then sips at it and says, "You're back." A sleepy tenor, stretched thin. "So she's the one. Hi there." Verity feels tears, shocking and unbidden, welling in the corners of her eyes. She wants to throw herself down in front of the boy. She wants to take his hand and run her fingers through his hair. She does neither of these things. She would never. She only blinks the moisture from her lashes, but the effort trembles from her spine to the tips of her fingers. There is a pause, during which Verity realizes that a small group of the people they've passed has assembled behind her and Santiago and the dog. Their presence is a static tingle between her shoulder braids. Their silence is reverent. She drops her gaze to the floor and the last drift of the boy's words. "Hi," she says, uncertainly. "Hi," repeats the boy, unnecessarily. "Thanks for coming. This is all pretty weird. I didn't even know she could write." Verity must look blank because the boy adds to Santiago, "You didn't tell her." It's not a question, though concern brushes the edges of his tone. His white lashes lower over the glitter of his gaze, a slow blink, then lift again. The light he casts illuminates the couch cushions, lining his skeletal fingers in an even paler white. The edges of his feathers gleam a little. Nothing of his halo touches Ouroboros, who remains an enigma of solid black. The dog lowers an ear, and Santiago shrugs one shoulder. "She came with Oro, but no, it wasn't my most convincing argument." Even the magician speaks more gently to the boy. There's deference in the set of his jaw. Verity turns her head, casting a quick look toward his face, and he quirks the corner of his lips in what might be apology. It tastes like rosemary and the warm embers of a fire. He picks up a lantern stand, holding it like a staff, and swings it to the side. The lantern sways, casting its dim glow across the block letters that have been crudely smeared across the wall. Verity, they spell, where they haven't begun to drip down in clotting rivulets. Verity had thought the smell of blood was the boy and the boy's incandescent decay. She realizes she was wrong. "Like I said," notes the boy, not unkindly, "it's a new one on me." He takes a pull of his beer and tilts his head, studying Verity with dazed, amiable curiosity. He sits slumped. His pale hair falls tangled in his eyes. She wants again to brush it aside and doesn't. When he shifts on the couch, the lines of his wings pull behind him, long shapes with strange bones beneath. "What are we doing with you then?" Santiago continues to stand, holding the lantern stand quite still so the light can fall against the smeared wall. Verity only knows he's looking at her because the dog turns its head to do the same, golden eyes impassive. Behind her, the small group whispers. She divides her attention between the boy's blue eyes and the sea glass glimmer of his words sliding along the worn floorboards. "I don't know," she says, honestly, and hears her own voice waver. "I want to ask you about this, about spaces between walls, about your wings, about a dog being a snake, but also, whose blood is that?" The boy's smile is bright but sad, the last flutter of a butterfly in winter. "Jihan's. So we guessed maybe she meant it." He turns his head then and calls to the blackness behind him, where the hall extends well past the fall of any tiny flame. "Hey, your friend's here." There are no footsteps. The lamplight glimmers first on a long, thin kitchen knife, and then on the tall figure of the woman who emerges from the shadows. At first, Verity can't tell the difference between the woman and the knife she holds. Both are cold, spare, precisely honed. The woman's eyes are a purer steel, lacking the old blade's spots of rust. Her hair falls in a single gray braid down her right shoulder, but her face is unlined. Her skin is dusky, her nose aquiline and sharp, though not quite straight. It might have been broken once. She wears a pale lavender cardigan, half buttoned and too large, a gray shirt, a pair of torn jeans. One of her sneakers is untied. She doesn't appear to care. The boy's fingers are tight around his bottle. Verity registers the sudden silence behind her and the way the dog has gone stiff. She stands quite motionless, and she tries her best to look at the woman who walks like a sword, but she cannot focus past the sense of burning coals scorching her spine, or the sweep of Ouroboros as it slides down off the couch cushions and crosses the floor to return to her side. She touches the dog's head and it ignores her, crouching slightly on its front paws as it stares up at the approaching woman. Santiago sets the lantern stand down on the floor. It makes a small scraping sound, startling in the stillness. The glowing boy drinks his beer, slouching deeper into the couch as his wings stretch and fold awkwardly across furniture that wasn't meant to fit them. He is the only one not watching the woman as she passes. He is studying Verity, and stars glitter in his eyes. Verity says hi again, because that seems appropriate. She adds helpfully, "I'm Verity," and she gestures toward the smears on the wall with one uncertain hand. She hears her own tone turn up a little at the end, like a question, and thinks Jacob would poke fun. Can hear him ask, "Are you?" It occurs to her that the strange woman is very close. The boy's wings rustle as he leans forward to set the bottle down, struggling to rise. "Hey now, what are you doing with..." He cuts off with a gasp, and Verity would look to see why, but there's a stinging pressure above her hip, and she's staring straight into a pair of blank steel eyes. The woman's irises are reflective as a cracked mirror. Verity sees her own face, pale and shocked, 1,000 times repeated. In the broken gaps, she sees something more, something cavernous and desperate. And for that yawning chasm, she has no words. Jihan, she thinks. And she's afraid most of all. Fire twists in her gut. Her hands close reflexively around the woman's, just where Jihan still grips the hilt of the knife that has slid seamlessly into the flesh between Verity's lowest ribs. She feels smooth skin, iron fingers, and the sticky heat of her own blood. She is frozen. Jihan's expression is stone. They do not breathe. Time resumes. Someone is yelling. "It's okay," says Verity softly. She doesn't know why, but it doesn't feel like a lie. "It's just a knife." She doesn't know why she says that either. Jihan's gray brows twitch together in the moment before she steps back. Verity's hands clench around the knife's wooden hilt, and Jihan turns away, her smooth braid draping down like a whip as she walks soundlessly back into the dark. Verity wonders if this blade in her organs should hurt more, but abruptly it does. She tries to gulp a breath and chokes on blood. The blood tastes of copper and salt that rings in her ears like a gong, and she cannot see it all because her late flowering fear is blooming like poppies, red petals around the lantern lights. She would fall, but there are arms around her, the scent of coal and lilac. It's a garden in a mine shaft. She thinks Santiago is swearing. The boy is there then, mouthing something she can't hear. His eyes are a furious sapphire. The light that shines within him turns his flesh to something alien and glows incandescent through the thin white fabric of his shirt. At his shoulders, the black wings spread slow and broad to block the light. He is perfect. Verity would be stunned if she were not trying very hard to live. The angel touches her, and the world goes white.
Thanks, CJ. I think the lighting works for some reason.
It's thematic.
It's yeah, I'm just pretending there's an angel standing in front of you beaming light at you. There was a every so often I get a question that I go around when we had gatherings in person. I would ask strangers, like, what's the creepiest place you've ever been to? That was one of the questions. And I feel like an abandoned theater in Ottawa with secret communes living in walls. That might be a good answer. Like, it's a good creepy place for a book.
Thank you.
We have one question so far from Jaclyn, who always comes through in a pinch. So while you guys are gathering your thoughts, I'll ask Jaclyn's question. And this for you, CJ. Jaclyn's currently reading your book, and she's been wondering while reading what inspired this novel.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much for reading the book. This novel is incredibly nerdy, actually. I started off with characters that have been living in my head for 20 years, some of them. They're all, not all of them, but a lot of them are old characters that I created for old role-playing campaigns, tabletop games, that kind of thing, some online role-play that I used to do. And I had all of these different characters that I'd created for different purposes and different settings. And they've been living in my head for so long. And I thought, hey, I'm going to put them all together and see what happens. And I ended up with this weird sort of Ottawa pastiche that I then turned into this, you know, exploration of different realities and different truths, and blended in a whole bunch of communications theory, because that's where I come from. So it's basically a bunch of characters that lived in my head, that I'm very familiar with, and communications theory that I teach professionally, and they all kind of got mashed together into a book that we affectionately referred to as The Brick for quite a while, because it's a commitment.
Oh, questions are piling in. I love that it was from Dungeons and Dragons, because if I wrote my Dungeons and Dragons characters, they would all just be halfling thieves. Like, that is all. I have been called a hobbit on the street before. I fully admit that is my halfling is my genre of people. Question from Neil. Neil's always interested to hear about process. For all the writers, do you have a routine, rituals, schedules for your writing? And I'll add a little bit. Do you plot or let things flow? Don't everyone rush. John, you go first. We'll go in order.
I try to be fairly disciplined about it, because I find that even when I don't feel like writing, sometimes I've done some of the best writing I've done when I'm not in the mood at all. So I just and I'm retired. So I stick to a schedule and kind of write pretty much for 3 hours a day, every morning when I feel sort of refreshed. And yeah, so I do have a routine, and I sort of plot. Sometimes I'll have an image. I know where a story wants to go, but I don't really like plotting too much. I like the adventure of it, of not knowing what's going to happen when I sit down to write, unless of course I'm editing something that's already written. But the first draft, like, it's an adventure. It's wonderful. I've tried years ago. I tried to plot things out, and because I had this creative writing teacher who said, you know, you need to have an outline. You need to have an outline. Well, I could never get past the outline. I couldn't figure out the outline, so I got so discouraged. So no, I don't like to plan everything.
I was the opposite. I had strings of fiction writers come. I took creative writing at York University. I have strings of fiction writers come in and be like, my process is discovering as writing. And I was just like, I have ADHD. It won't work. And finally Andrew Piper came in and said, and he's a horror writer, so I should have known. He showed up and was like, no, I have a strict plot. And now that I'm working on a fiction piece, I'm like, oh my God, yeah, like I wouldn't be able to, I don't know how I get my shoes tied without a spreadsheet telling me what to do. But in poetry, it's the opposite. I don't know what to do. Jaclyn?
I'm a lot like John. I find it hard to plot too far in advance, because then I lose the inspiration, or else it just doesn't seem to feel natural. And I found it actually a lot easier to write creatively before I was published. And it's something that I've been struggling with since. Before, it was something that I just always did, and it was for me. And the Inquirer started as my dissertation for my master's. And the only reason I went for a master's in creative writing is because it sounded great, and I needed a master's in order to continued teaching at the university I was teaching. People knew me as a writer, but I was a technical writer, business writer, and then my hobby was also in public. So I've been battling with that a bit. I did have another idea for a book, and I was quite excited and getting into the research stages for it. But then the pandemic hit, and this book was set in the medical field, which is completely different now. And since I'm not in the medical field, I don't feel comfortable just writing about it in the past without a lot of research. So I've put it on pause, and I decided to get comfortable again and write for the love of it. I've just about done, I'm writing a novel for my son, who's a middle grade. So that's what I've been working on until either I feel comfortable with another fiction idea, or else the pandemic makes it a little easier for me to do research on that other idea.
Yeah, I've been struggling with writing too. Like I've been hearing this from a lot of friends who are writers. My theory is grand unifying theory of why the pandemic's. I think we don't know what the future is going to be as a species right now. Like we don't if there's been a cataclysmic shift, it feels like, and I don't know what people will be interested in by the time it gets published 2 years down the road. My imagination's blocked in that way. And I'm wondering, that's my theory. I think a lot of people are just like, how do you, how? Carlin, CJ?
Oh, you conjured me with my real name.
I knew I was going to do that at some point tonight. I did the same thing to Derek.
Okay, it's not a
last
secret.
event. So,
we're on Niall's question here. So, do we have routines, rituals, schedules? I don't have a schedule, but I do have a routine in as much as I try to write a minimum of 100 words a day. And I wrote in Veritas at 100 words a day, and it took 3 years to get a first draft. And of course, at that point, it's a huge disjointed mess because nothing matches anything else. But then I can edit a disjointed mess. So for me, it's just really important, even if it's the last thing at the end of the day, and I'm getting ready to go to bed, and I open up my netbook and type out 6 sentences, just to spend 30 seconds thinking about the current project and try to get something down on the screen, even if it's garbage, even if I delete it later. It's important to me to just keep going in tiny pieces. I am very bad at doing large projects unless I break them down into tiny little pieces that I can do one at a time. So if I have a daily word count that seems manageable. I do like to have a rough outline. Normally when I start writing something, I know how it begins and I know how it ends, and then the middle is, I noodle around for a bit until I have a general idea, and then I make myself a point form outline of scenes that I have to write. In Veritas, it's pretty complex. If anyone's read it, it's all of the chapters have their own introductory sections. So every chapter is actually like 2 pieces. And then there are also like quotes and stuff scattered throughout, and conversations that the protagonist has with the narrator, and all these separate sections. And at one point when I was editing, and a friend who was kind enough to read an early draft told me that she found a certain section to be slow. And I had to do up a Word document with a chart and exactly all the pieces that went into each chapter. And I cut it up into pieces, and I rearranged all the pieces of paper on my living room floor until I could figure out what it would look like. So I'm not really a planner when I start, but when I get to the editing process, and when I get to the process where I know what the story should look like, I'm really detailed.
Yeah, when I say I plot, I have an idea and then I go away. I literally last night, I decided to make a character who was dead alive. And not as a zombie, but like alive the whole time during the story. And I'm like, oh no, I'm halfway through this. What do I do? And it's like, save it for the second draft. Like,
so you wait, you don't go back? I'm one of those people that break the rules, and I go back and edit throughout the whole process.
It depends. I write poetry, and that's how I like poetry. It's a layering, I think, a bit like painting. And I'm bad. Yeah, I do. But that's more for sentences for me, and like images, and like this detail doesn't feel right, I'll shift that a little bit, or this emotion, but not adding a whole other character in the reader. Like, it just seems so daunting right now. There's so many words in a novel and in short stories even. I don't know how you guys do it. Just scrolling up. So Jaclyn, there's two questions for you. One from Jackie C, one from AJ. First question, in your book, why do you think it is important that community is created / destroyed through the print medium rather than through person-to-person gossip? And question 2, are there plans for a sequel? And if so, will Bat Boy make a cameo?
For question 1, I'm not quite sure what the question's asking. If you wanted to clarify, I can go to question 2 while waiting for the clarification. For the Inquirer, I've been asked a few times if there's going to be a sequel, and so far there's not one in the works, although the books, the 2 adult books that I had considered since writing it, did have little connections for the fun of it to Kingsley. The one refers to Kingsley, that's just where he'd grown up, and the other one, a relative, was from there. I guess I just thought it'd be fun if I wrote a bunch of novels and each one kind of linked to another one. Oh, and I see, just curious why you opted for a tabloid. Because there's something about tabloids that just always catch my attention. I was that person standing in line in the grocery store that would read the cover of the tabloids while I wait my turn and wonder, well, what did Jennifer Aniston's mom think of these headlines? Or what does the Queen think of these comments about her and these alleged affairs or whatever's happening? And so I thought, well, what then would I feel like if whatever rumors or things, or whether it's true or not, started appearing on a tabloid cover for public consumption instead of just being whispered? So the idea just grew into the Inquirer.
Bat Boy was on the national, is it not the Inquirer, it's not the National Enquirer, it's the other one. That world of the news of the world, something like that. And it basically Nosferatu. It's like Muppet Baby Nosferatu. That's the way to think about it.
How could I forget about Bat Boy? You know what? Now he just might have to show up, just for AJ.
Sorry, I have to scroll up now. I got distracted by Bat Boy. Oh, scroll too far. A question for everyone. Do you do book research before or while you write? If you do research, do you travel to the setting for research? And that was from Eileen. We'll go from in the order of who read again. John?
I tend to do research as I'm writing. Not beforehand, because like I said, my process, I don't really know where things are going to go. So I'll suddenly realize I have to find out about something. I don't know much about this because this character has to do this or end up in this particular place or goes into a hospital. And now I have to find out, okay, what's the process there? So I tend to do research as I go along. Like right now I'm working on a novel that takes place in the 1970s. So I'll suddenly be like, okay, I'm describing this character. Well, I have to look into, obviously, and remember 70s fashions. So I'll do stuff on the internet and it's fun. So I stop the writing and just start looking at, bell-bottom pants and whatever, or tank tops or something like that.
Polyester.
Yeah. So all the stuff I still have in my closet upstairs. So I tend to do it as I go along, depending on the project, but generally that's the way I work.
I like following John because he pretty much answers it how I would first. It's like having a cheat sheet. Same thing, that I have a certain amount of familiarity with the locations and the topics because the idea came from somewhere, and But then afterwards, it's a matter of looking into it of when, oh, this is going to happen to my character. I guess I have to see if that's logical and how it would happen. For the Inquirer, it's set in small town Alberta. And I was born and raised small town Alberta, so there is a lot of background research for that. But I grew up in the little hamlet and not necessarily on a farm. So there were a lot of questions to my husband. I called him my farming Google because I needed to know how to castrate and how to brand and all these things. And he said it was funny that how good my imagination was, because I described the smell of what I thought it would smell like to brand these calves perfectly. And I hadn't witnessed it myself at that point.
That brand, the word brand, because of where it comes from, I'm the marketing person, so I have to people ask me about branding, and I'm always like, it does come with a waft in my head of, that you described very well. Yeah. CJ?
Singed hair.
Oh yeah, just unpleasant.
I mean, my entire academic career is doing research, so I try to avoid research when I'm writing fiction, and I like making stuff up. But since the novel was set in Ottawa, I mean, a lot of that is, hey, you know, I'm from there and I know a lot of these areas, but I was spot checking things like how old is the Chateau Laurier, and how long has the Aberdeen Pavilion been there, and where exactly is the Chaudière Falls Power Station? And at one point, they completely redid Lansdowne Park, which is where the sort of denouement of the novel takes place. Like, there was this huge construction project and they redid all of Lansdowne Park. And I think that's the only site where I actually went and visited it in person to see what it currently looked like. And there were a couple things I looked up on Google Maps, that kind of thing. Yeah, just to try to get little details right in, not throughout the book, I wasn't too obsessed over it, but in individual places to try to give it that sense of grounded reality. So that's the kind of thing that I ended up researching.
The copy editor and proofreader at the press, whoever monitors my Google for the searches I have to make for all your books, AJ's last book was the funniest, because I'm researching like what specifically is a cougar. As there's some stuff in AJ's book that I was like, this act. yeah, there's some specifics in that book that were fun to be like, okay, my Google history is much more, much less vanilla than it used to be. Up next, a question for CJ. Why is it important that Verity sees this in-between world because of her synesthesia, rather than, say, a magical amulet or some other staple of fantasy novels?
Oh, well, because I want to be new and different and exciting. But also, it was really important that Verity's, not necessarily her synesthesia, but her perception of the world needed to be integral to her character. It needed to be something that she had grown up with and been alienated because of, been treated differently so it couldn't just be, a ring that she put on and could take off and, suddenly perceive the world like everyone else did. It had to be something that was innate to her. But the reason why it was synesthesia was just because I was playing around with it and it was really fun to write all the different descriptions.
Yeah, the synesthesia is interesting. I have two poet friends who have synesthesia, and editing with them is interesting. One of them is like the vowels have different colors, and they'll be like, this poem is too blue. There's too many of the same vowel in it. And then I'll notice and I'll be like, yeah, there's a lot of O's in this. But yeah, no, it is an interesting, I think, like one of the questions I had for you was like details that are real that can make the fantastical more believable. Like the fact it's a real theater, or the real park. Actually,
the theater is one of the few places in the book that isn't real. Although if you're from Ottawa, it's like I took Barrymore's and the Mayfair and mashed them together and put them in the wrong place on Bank Street. All of the other places, what the Ottawa that you see in the book isn't tourist Ottawa, like no one goes to the Parliament buildings, that kind of thing. It's the Ottawa that I knew from being a teenager there. So there's a certain stone building in the Byward Market where there are a bunch of restaurants, and that's in there. Or I stole the location of a friend's townhouse on 2nd Avenue in the Glebe and used that for the protagonist, or, you know, Little Italy on Preston, that kind of thing. So it's just those little mundane details that are scattered through it. Yeah, to try to give it a sense of grounding for the fantasy elements.
Yeah, that's grounding is the good word for it. It's I always think of like how normal Kansas looks before like she hops into Oz, right? Or is blown to Oz. Like you need that to, yeah, no, it's great. You tricked me though, and I'm not gonna like you anymore for that. Question for John. Do you see Alberta's mountains as Gothic? And what does Gothic mean to you?
Oh, you know, I never really did until I started writing these stories. But when I started reflecting on it as I was writing, it really is kind of a Gothic landscape. You know, like the Rocky Mountains in some ways, or any kind of wilderness it's sort of like a vast haunted house where you don't know what's around the corner. You don't know what you're going to encounter in terms of wildlife, in terms of the weather. It's an incredibly dangerous landscape that, of course, can turn on a dime. I mean, you hear those stories all the time about people getting in trouble in the wilderness, or you know, encountering wildlife or whatever it happens to be. So in that sense, I did start to think of it as a real kind of Gothic landscape. And then you have places like, you know, the Banff Springs Hotel and the Chateau Lake Louise, which were kind of, I mean, especially the Banff Springs is a real sort of Gothic castle area. And of course, and the last time I was at, you know, I never stayed there, but at the Chateau Lake Louise, I just couldn't get out of my mind the image of Jack Nicholson proceeding through the halls with an axe in his, like those places now are kind of creepy to me and strange. And also that landscape is also full of ghosts, right? Haunted by history, whether it's the history of the sort of mistreatment of Indigenous peoples, or one of my stories deals with the internment camps that were set up in the Rocky Mountains, you know, interring mostly Ukrainian Canadians at the time. So those landscapes are full of ghosts. So as I say, to me, it's like a vast haunted house. And those images kept repeating back to me, especially as I worked on the stories. And that's kind of how it ended up a collection as well, because there was just so much to write about in those landscapes, you know, and even celebrities like I have one story about Marilyn Monroe, who filmed River of No Return in the Rocky Mountains at kind of an unhappy time in a certain way in her career. So yeah, anyway, that's enough said.
And that I watch a lot of old movies, so like those old celebrities feel like ghosts in a weird way, because we are visited by them whenever we watch one of their old movies. So it's kind of yeah, an imprinting, a ghostly imprinting on us. Yeah, no, that's interesting.
Well, yeah, and just sort of a side note too, I always forget to mention this, but also those landscapes, if you go to the Grand Canyon or whatever, last time I was there a couple of years ago with my wife, I kind of was having like a really extreme reaction to it, where it's breaking out in a cold sweat. It's like those landscapes are so overwhelming that our physical selves seem so puny. You know, it's a bit of a cliche and insignificant set against this history and geological history that, and you know, there's a Gothicness to that as well. So yeah.
It's sublime. Like I've experienced the sublime twice because of landscape. And it was both because the vertical, which I don't think we do that often. Once was in like between that road between Banff and Jasper. I always forget the name of it, being from, I don't know, I forget the name of it. And once it,
Icefields Parkway, is that the, yeah, Icefields Parkway, yeah.
and once when I was in like New York, just because the bill, like I'd been living in Fredericton where there was literally one escalator in the whole city. So like the vertical wasn't something I'd been experiencing that often. So just the fact I had to look up, yeah, it's
yeah, and you're on those mountain roads too, and it always freaks me out. Was like, well, if I just turn the steering wheel just you know, a couple of centimeters this way, I'll die because I'll be off the side of the cliff. So that idea freaks me out as well, right? One reason I don't even like to, I can't hold a really young baby, like a newborn baby, because their fragility freaks me out. I can't do it. Right? It's just too fragile. And anyway, it's a strange analogy, but it's a similar feeling.
So on the, oh, we got one more question in. I think it's going to be our last question for the evening. So if any of you are typing your questions, you'll have to come to the next event and think of a question, type it up, and I'll read it all out. Question for Jaclyn. Your novel has a small, and sorry, I haven't been saying the people. So Anne asked about the Gothic. Bertrand is asking, your novel has a small town setting and you come from a small town. Was writing an opportunity to correct the past, or was it more of a romp through nostalgia for you, or something else?
That's a great question. And I guess a little bit of both. I get asked a lot if this was based on true or my own small town, and it's not. Kingsley is a bit of every small town that I've ever been to with sports or anything, and family members. And I get told a lot that from other people, from readers, that they see their own small town in it. For me, I can relate to the protagonist who has mixed feelings because the small town is home, but then she also felt a need to escape and grow outside of, and there's events in her lives that made it so that she wasn't necessarily comfortable anymore in that small town. And I can relate to that, even though our stories are different. And while I poke a little bit of fun with tabloids and small town gossip, I, one, loved my childhood, and my small town has a special place in my heart. But and two, the story does go a little bit deeper than just the poking fun, and talks about the downside to being part of any tight-knit community, whether it's a small town or else a smaller community within a bigger community. I was shocked when I went to university. I was a small town girl going to a big city, and it wasn't all that different because you still had the little cliques and the same types of dynamics that you had in the small town. Did that answer that question?
Here's the thing about answering questions at events. They have to take what you say.
It was, though, yes, it was a chance to explore not so much the small town, but topics that hit home for me. So it's fiction, but there were some deeper topics in there that I needed to work through, and the novel was an opportunity to do that.
Your book has one of the, I've told you before, the X character is like top-notch person I don't want to ever talk to. Like, because, yeah, good job.
Thank you.
I want to thank you all for being here, wherever here is for you, and to the authors for reading, and for all, like, you came out with questions, and my heart is so happy about that. We have a ton of events coming up still this spring. April 27th, 2 debut nonfiction authors who had substantial careers outside of writing will be reading. That includes the first woman given a Lifetime Achievement Award by the Directors Guild of Canada, Anne Wheeler, and Norm Boucher, who had a long career as an RCMP officer and is sort of looking back at an early part of his career and questioning some of the processes in his book about being an undercover police officer. Audrey's book will be the official bookseller for that event as well. I just want to mention Anna's up for the Robert Croach City of Edmonton Book Prize. You don't want to miss this. So you'll see, if you scroll up a little bit, our events page, there's links. Same process as how you got here. I hope to see you there as well. May 5th, we have a double launch of 2 brand new novels with a guest reader, the guest reader is another stellar short story writer, Tracy Skuse. And I'm calling this the Cage Squared launch because it's Karen Hoffman and Kevin Holloway. It just happened that their books really meshed well together. And Karen was originally a Noon Attack, like her first book was a Noon Attack book, and Kevin's book is the latest Noon Attack book. So you definitely want to come out for that as well. May 10th, another double launch, 2 historical novels. Both have a connection to World War I, which kind of makes sense because just over 100 years ago, I think World War I's been on my mind a lot. 1918 flu. The 1970s has actually been on my mind a lot too. So John talking about the 1970s. So I think it makes sense that we're considering these times. And that's Daniel Neal and GG award-winning author Glenn Huser. So please come to that. And a lot of Edmonton content. May 17th, Edmonton Poet Laureate Nisha Patel will launch her debut collection with guest reader, multiple award nominated Bertram Bickersteth, who asked the last question tonight. And that's May 17th. Links are at newwestpress.com/events, and that's NeWest with a 1W. Also, while you're here, if you sign up for our newsletter this month, you have a chance to win an ebook version of one of my favorite NeWest titles. It takes place partially in Calgary, partially in England. Corinna Chung's Belinda's Rings. On the main page of our website, you can see where to sign up for that. Thanks again, everyone. And as I always say at the end of events, remember, if you can, please continue to support small publishers and bookstores of any size, including, especially, one of our local stores, Audrey's Books. We wouldn't be here without you all. And y'all are great. So thanks for coming out. Good night.
Thank you.